Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Crimson Chronicles podcast. I'm Rick Morton along with Tommy Ford. We are here again to talk a little bit about Crimson Tide history. We've been making our way through basketball history during this session, and man, we're having a great time this week. And in an upcoming episode, both we're gonna kind of segment into a couple of great stories from one of the most notable names in Crimson Tide basketball history. We're pretty excited to sit down with him tonight. Tommy, why don't you get us rolling and give us an introduction and tell us about our guests?
Well, thank you, Rick. It's great to have the one and only Mark Gottfried in with us. When I was little, I looked up to Mark as a Crimson Tide basketball player, and we're going to share some of those memories tonight. But Mark, great to have you, man.
Oh, this is going to be fun. See, nobody realizes how often in Colton Coliseum I used to just come hide. I would hide in your cubicle down below. Me and you, Tommy, that was my place. That was my safe haven. I could go sit with Tommy, and we would break it all down there in those little offices with Tide Pride way back then. So we go way back.
That's right. Yeah. Nobody could find us down there. Even our best customers couldn't find us. We were down and we called it the dungeon. Yeah, it was a good hiding spot. But, well, great to have you. And we're going to talk about your college career at Alabama and growing up in Mobile and things like that. And we're also going to talk about your coaching days, and probably going to be a two-parter. Rick, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Man, there's way too much for us to do in one episode.
Yeah. Well, we'll get started. Mark, tell us about growing up in Mobile, your early days playing basketball, and the roles your dad, Joe, and your uncle Mike had in your love of sports, especially basketball.
You know, I was so fortunate because, I had two people, obviously my dad and then his brother, my uncle, Mike Gottfried, that were in sports. And not only those two, but, obviously Jack Harbaugh, which then had Jim and John. And so we had sports all around us and people that really were able to help us kind of, navigate as we all got into coaching. But, I was born in Ohio. My family left there when I was very young. And when we got to Mobile, my dad was the assistant athletic director. A lot of people don't remember this, but my dad had been the basketball coach at Southern Illinois University. And when he got let go, Cliff Ellis, who ended up at Auburn and did a great job at Auburn, Cliff hired my dad as the assistant athletic director at South Alabama. And then 1 year later, Cliff took the Clemson job from South Alabama. So my dad became the athletic director there and stayed there for 28 years as the AD, which is kind of unheard of in college Division I sports. But, Mobile was wonderful for me. It was, the people that my classmates at UMS were so great. They were so inclusive. They brought me in, and to this day, I'm still friends with so many of those guys. And then my family has made Mobile home. They've been there now for 40-something years, and it's really become home for them. Mobile ended up being a great place for our family and for my dad's career, obviously, as an athletic director. And then, for me as well there at UMS. So I always tell people it was one of the great blessings I've had when we moved into the state of Alabama.
Yeah. Well, all right, you signed with Oral Roberts out of UMS and played there during the 82-83 season. Had Alabama recruited you during that process?
There's a great question. And so you got to remember, this would have been in 80-81 or 81-82. And Alabama at that time, Enos Watley, who I think is the best point guard to ever play there, period, end of story. He was there. And, Coach Sanderson recruited me. Sonny Smith recruited me really, really hard. I mean, really hard at Auburn. And I really loved Sonny. He was just a wonderful guy. But I understood with Wimp, too. They had Enos, and at the time I was a little bit more of a point guard than an off guard. And they recruited me, but you could tell it was kind of like, they were in, but not all in. And, I took recruiting visits to Ole Miss and to Duke and Ohio State. And believe it or not, I ended up choosing Oral Roberts of all places. And it ended up being a nice year. But deep in my gut, the whole time I was there, I realized that I wanted to play at the highest level. I wanted to play in the best conference, in the best leagues. So at the end of that year, Enimo entered the draft. He went ahead and entered the draft. And Alabama was in need at that point then to kind of, reshape their backcourt a little bit. And so it kind of fell perfectly for me and it ended up, turning out really well.
Well, I assume Wimp recruited you, right?
Wimp did.
Tell me about when and where he signed you.
Since there's a statute of limitations now that have passed for 5 years, I was playing at Oral Roberts, and this would have been probably February. I think Alabama at that time knew that Enos was going to go into the draft at that point. I think probably they were beginning to sense it, that he would enter. And I can remember we finished a game there in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I walked out. I'd taken a shower, I walk out, and I heard this guy in the crowd going, well, looking around, this is the first time I've ever told this story too. So this is for your show. Silas McKinney was at the game. He was the assistant coach for Alabama.
Yeah.
He was at the game, and I met Silas that night, and he had explained that, there was going to be an opportunity there for me at Alabama. And so then we finished the season out and started to recruit me. And he finally at one point came to Tulsa. This story has been well documented, and this is a true story. This is as true as can be. He called me one night. He said, Mark, there was a hotel right across the street from campus. He said, I'm going to stay in this hotel as long as I have to until you sign. And so a day went by, and like another day went by. Now I'm feeling terrible. I'm feeling bad because I know he's sitting over there in a hotel. So I finally called him. I said, Coach, I'm ready. So he drove over in a taxi. He was on his way to the airport. And he pulled out the scholarship papers, and he set them on top of the taxi, and we both signed in front of the dorm there at Oral Roberts. So that story, they can't get us in trouble now, but I'm sure there's a violation there. So,
well, kind of like Mal Moore waiting on Nick Saban, right?
He was down there waiting in Miami.
Well, Mark, I've heard of guys in Major League Baseball being on the taxi squad, but I've never heard of that in college basketball. So that's pretty interesting deal.
That was a true story.
Well, when you transferred to Alabama back in the old days, I know a lot of the younger folks that are watching our show have no idea that transfers used to have to sit out, but you had to sit out a year. And we had Wimp on the show a few weeks ago, and so folks are familiar with him. Everybody that knows Alabama basketball knows Wimp, the quiet, shy, reserved, and sunny Wimp Sanderson. What was it like to be a redshirt for Wimp as you were sitting out that year?
I'm we'll probably talk about this at some point with the no transfer now and the portal and all that. But having been a player who transferred and sat out, I tell everybody it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was the best thing that I had to sit out a year. Number one, it allowed me to get a little bit bigger and stronger. And back then our weight room, we had Al Miller was our head strength coach, and Ken Johnston and Rocky Colburn, and these guys were so good. And I hadn't really been around a great weightlifting program. Now, I never looked like the Incredible Hulk or anything, but it definitely helped me. And then the long-term part of that story was when you sat out a year, and Jim Farmer had redshirted his first year. We were roommates. But then as you go fast forward, when we became fifth-year seniors, right, and we went into Rupp Arena, and the story, another true story, when we walked out and Rex Chapman was the big phenom for Kentucky, and Jim gave him a forearm shiver right there in the jump circle, and we both looked at him, and Jim said, "Oh, he's just a boy, Mark, just a boy." We were both 23 years old. We were much older then as fifth-year seniors, so I liked it. I mean, it was hard not to play in the games you want to play, but I got so much, I think I got better. It helped me acclimate to Alabama's system and the players and the program. So I thought it was a really good thing. I didn't mind it. I was able to graduate after my fourth year. And then my fifth year, I took all graduate level classes. I was in graduate school at Alabama. So I looked at the positives way more than I ever looked at any of the negatives of sitting out.
Well, you had a great, fantastic career at Alabama. Sophomore season, 84-85, you finished 23-10, 11-7 in the SEC. You averaged 8.4 points a game. Alabama advanced to the Sweet 16. The next year, 85-86, Team finished 24-9, 13-5 in the SEC, and this was the year you had to play Kentucky 4 times, twice in the regular season, once in the SEC tournament, and you got paired up against them in the NCAA tournament. You lost all 4 games. I remember it like it was yesterday. It's only been 40 years, so.
Did you have to remind me of that one? I thought this was going to be a positive show. You're reminding.
So, but you did advance to the Sweet 16. But we want to talk about the great 86-87 team, your senior year. Perhaps the greatest Alabama team ever. Certainly one of the top 3 or 4 in basketball history. Finished 28-5, 16-2 in the SEC. Had the thrilling season ender over Florida in overtime, the infamous Doc Blanchard game on the clock. If you remember our friend Doc, it took about 4 seconds to play 1 second of basketball, but like it's statute of limitations, that's just. Then you beat Tennessee, Auburn, LSU to win the SEC tournament. You averaged 10.3 points a game. Starters that season: Terry Connor, you, Jim Farmer, Michael Ainsley, Derek McKee, and James Jackson and Keith Askins were the first ones off the bench. Tell us about that season, including the 2 NCAA wins over North Carolina A&T and New Orleans and Birmingham, and then unfortunately the Providence game in Louisville.
Tommy, it was such a great year. And Jim and I, obviously, Jim Farmer, we're still really close, talk all the time. But, you go back and think about it. Our losses that year, we lost down to Florida State on the road at the buzzer. We lost at home to Kentucky at the buzzer. We lost at Florida at the buzzer. And Duke had beat us in the Netherlands up and then, or in the Meadowlands, not the Netherlands, the Meadowlands. We might have beaten them in the Netherlands, but in the Meadowlands, we got beat. But, they beat us by about 10 or 12, I think, or 14. They beat us. But other than that, 3 of the 4 losses were literally at the buzzer. It's a last-second shot that either went in or didn't go in. And so we had so much confidence that year. Jim and I were fifth-year seniors. Terry Connor was a senior. J.J. Jackson was a fifth-year senior. Derek McKee had just blossomed into, the SEC Player of the Year and was such a good player. Mike Ansley was a great role player for us, and then Keith Askins off the bench. But that team we knew we had a chance to be good. We had been to the Sweet 16 2 years in a row before, and we really, truly felt like this year we were going to make a run and get in the Final Four and have a chance to win it all. And we could shoot the ball pretty well. Jim and I both. Terry was such a good point guard, and, Derek was really good. But, it's interesting. We win the SEC tournament in Atlanta, and just as we all know that Dale Brown, the epitome of Mr. Enthusiasm and, his character, he actually rounded us up as we shook hands there. We played LSU, and I think it was a championship game of the SEC tournament, and he basically convinced that night too, you guys are good enough to win it all. Your team can win the whole thing. And we really believed it. And, we had played, we got the first 2 games in Birmingham. And, a lot of people forget this one too. And I tell this story all the time. It was the double whammy. It was, we had beaten North Carolina A&T. We were getting ready to play New Orleans. Benny Dees was the head coach. And the game before us came down to the wire, and Austin Peay had tied the game against Providence, and the winner was going to play us in the Sweet 16 if we won. And the kid for Austin Peay missed 2 foul shots with no time on the clock, and Providence beat Austin Peay in overtime, and probably for them gave them a little bit of momentum. And we went to Louisville, and, Rick Pitino, I think, was a little bit ahead of the curve with the three-point line and utilizing the three-point line. But they had a game where they played so well, and we struggled. And here's a great story I'm going to tell you about it. So this last year, Jim and I flew into Nashville, and Jim Farmer and I got in the car, drove down to Birmingham, and we took Coach Sanderson to lunch, and we went back to Coach's house, and we're sitting there. And now you got to remember, this is 40 years later. 40 years has passed, and he looked at both of us, and he said, "Shit, I didn't have y'all ready. I didn't have y'all ready that game." He said, You guys had them earphones earphones in. We're in the locker room, and Jim and I said, Coach, I don't think those earphones had anything to do with that game. But it shows you as a coach, we sometimes, the wins are fabulous, but those losses just stay with you. They don't leave you. And here we were, Jim and I and Coach Sanderson, 40 years later, still talking about that day at Louisville. And because Providence then played Georgetown, it was a really weak Georgetown team. It wasn't the traditional Georgetown teams. And then, Providence made it to the Final Four. But it was such a great year. It was so much fun. We had great character on our team. Guys, just great people. So anyway, it ended up just being a phenomenal year.
Well, Mark, you just remembering that as just a really gritty veteran squad. It's funny, you mentioned the story about Rex Chapman. I was actually doing a little bit of prep for this interview and went back and found the Sports Illustrated where Ralph Wiley actually interviewed you guys. It was the Super Bowl edition, I think, so it would have come out like right around this time. And he told that story and said, talked about you and Jim basically getting a good look at Rex Chapman in his face, and then he just said, hey, look, he's just a boy, right? I mean, you guys, what kind of advantage did you have with guys like you and Terry Connor and Jim as seniors on that team with a couple of juniors that were regularly in the rotation? I mean, you had a veteran squad that had seen a lot and had done a lot that really carried you through that entire season.
Well, I think so many times in basketball, college sports especially, when you have a veteran team, guys that have been through the wars a little bit, and you're coming down to the end of your career. Like Jim and I were fifth year, Terry and JJ was a fifth year, and then Terry was a senior. But all four of our perimeter players, all four of us, we knew that this is it. And so I think there's a little bit more of a sense of urgency. Even when I coached later, you had those veteran teams. They were just a little different sometimes. The young guys, they don't always, there's not that sense of urgency sometimes with the young guys because they know they've got another year and, there's time ahead. And, but that team, I think the age, along with Derek being so good, Derek McKee, put us over the top. And here's another funny one with you when you're talking about Rex. I was scouting for the Mavericks a couple of years ago, and I had to go into Lexington, and so I'm sitting there, and I'm kind of behind the bench there in about the second row, and Rex, I haven't talked to Rex in years, and so Rex Chapman was at the game, and Rex came, and he sat right beside me, and I said, hey, Rex, and we're just sitting there talking. He goes, I'm still pissed off you guys called me a boy that day. So, again, 40 years had passed, so but anyway, that team as a veteran, older team, I think that really gave us an advantage. And I think, what the job Coach Sanderson did, and Dave Hobbs was such a good assistant coach on that with us during that time period, making sure we were prepared and scouting reports. But I think the age factor was definitely an advantage for us.
Well, and just to follow that up, I mean, we've lost something, I think, in current college basketball because we rarely ever see that anymore. There aren't teams that are staying together for 2 and 3 years where juniors and seniors are playing together, where you've had 30, 40, 50 games together over the course of a career. What do you feel like, how has that diminished the game, or how's that changed the game in what we currently have as college basketball?
I think we all adapt, and that's one thing that you have to do because things do change. Nothing stays the same forever, and you have to adapt. But one of the parts that's kind of bothers me, and I do a podcast, obviously, and I've had a lot of guys, like I've had Tyler Hansborough played at North Carolina, who was a 4-year player at North Carolina, and Robert Ory, and I've had all these guys. And the one thing I think that has, in my own personal opinion, that I don't like is the fans don't really get to know these guys over a 2, 3, 4, and sometimes 5-year period. There's nothing wrong with a transfer. I transferred, but I'm not a fan of the guys transferring every year. All of a sudden, the guy's gone to 4 schools in 5 years, or, now who knows? I mean, they change every single year. And so sometimes for the fan of the team, they're not getting that relationship. Take a guy like Antoine Petway, came in as a walk-on for me, and Well, he stayed there 100 years. The guy never left until last year. But, even as a player, the fans started to identify, and boy, he became such a favorite because he was there. And so we've lost that part of college basketball with the rules which in the place as they are now.
Do you think it'll stay that way? Do you see changes on the horizon? Is there at some point, do you think we'll see things back up a little bit?
I ask people this all the time, and I've had a lot of coaches on my podcast too. And here's the tricky part. Once you give something, it's hard to take it away. And what we've given the players right now is that ability to transfer every year. And, obviously NIL changes the game too. I wish I was playing in some NIL back then. I'd have got a cheeseburger here and there somewhere, I think. But I just think that the part that bothers the coaches today, and I think the older coaches, it's not the NIL. That's not a issue. The rules around it have to get cleaned up because there's a lot of poaching going on, and guys are promising who knows what, and everybody's lying out there as far as what they're getting offered, and there's a lot of that going on. But I think the biggest issue that your older coaches have is the transfer portal. And if I were the commissioner for a day, and you said, okay, I see where we're going, and we've got to let everybody transfer one time without sitting out. I'll give you that one. But after that, if you're going to transfer, then you have to go back and sit out again like you used to. I think that would curb some of the movement, because the part that bothers me, and I played and I coached for a long time. I was in coaching for 30-something years, is that we as college coaches, this is not professional sports, although it kind of is now, but we still are in the business of hopefully helping kids transition from high school to adult life.
That's right.
And the part that bothers me is we are not teaching young people how to persevere and fight through it. Difficult circumstances happen. Tommy mentioned earlier, my junior year when I played for Wimp, J.J. Jackson had a phenomenal year that year. And my junior year, we were almost splitting minutes, he and I, a little bit. And J.J.'s a really good player. In today's situation, I could have just left and went somewhere else and played. But what I was forced to do was I said, okay, I've got this guy, J.J. Jackson. He's a really good player. He's breathing down my neck. And I got one answer. And my answer is to get better. And I've got to separate myself from him. And so what it did, it forced me to get in the gym every day and get my game better and work on my game to where there was a little separation between JJ and I. And I think we were losing that. I came back for one of our teams, got honored there, and I'm out with the guys after, and Chuck Davis and Demetrius Smith and Kennedy Winston, and we're all kind of hanging out over in Dudley. And Chuck Davis didn't play as a freshman. He said, Coach, I'd have been gone. I'd have left. I'd have just left. But that's not uncommon for today's day. And so that bothers me that we're losing that a little bit. We should be teaching these young people that, if you want to transfer once, you can do that. But after that, you got to sit out. And sometimes it's just better to stay the course and dig down a little bit deeper, find a way to get it done, and get yourself to where you can play.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Mark, it's been 38 years since you finished your career in the Crimson and White. Did you know that you still hold the school record for career 3-point field goal percentages? Did you know that?
I didn't know for sure, but, Mo Williams and Ernest Shelton and some of those guys, they still give me some crap because there was one time I had Mo. I think Mo had made 6 or 7, and I took him out. And later he said, Coach, I was going to go for the record. Not while I'm coaching.
Well, yours is a career record. Let me tell you these stats here. A game record is Ron Steele, 7 of 8 versus Arkansas on February 21st of 2006. In a season, Gary Waits was 52 of 101 in the 90-91 season. So that's a little over, 51%. That's career. Great. Mark Gottfried, 81 of 167 from 1985 to 1987. 48% from three. You still hold a career record.
Yeah, and I still give Coach Sanderson some crap. You gotta let me shoot a little bit more, Coach. Come on, you gotta find me out there. Let me fire a few more up, Coach.
So what year was the 3-point line added? Was it 86?
No, actually, that was only one season. So it was 86, 87. I only had the 3-point line for 1 year. So I made those 80, 82 or whatever it was in one season. But and it changed for guys like myself and even Jim Farmer, who had the ability to make it as well. And then, as time went on, kids practiced it a lot more and got better at making the three. But for me, it really enhanced how valuable I became because of that line. And, I think we went over to Mississippi State, or I think Vanderbilt at home. I can't really remember some of those games, but, where I really got going a little bit. But the line really helped. It helped a lot.
All right. So the question everybody wants to know, what was it like playing for Wimp?
Loved it. Absolutely loved playing for Coach Sanderson. He was I tell people this all the time about, and most people around the country, as I go anywhere, I could be in California or Michigan, or doesn't matter where I go, people, when they think of Wimp Sanderson, they think of the plaid jackets and the sport coats and kind of his antics on the sideline. But, one thing that he did is he kept it really simple. We didn't run complicated offense. We didn't do anything complicated at all. Boy, you better play hard. And he demanded that effort. And he just was so good. He's such a good basketball coach. And, probably, in my view, one of the more underappreciated, coaches around the country, truly. And you look back and think of what some of his records are silly. They really are silly. How many SEC championship tournaments and what his record was in the tournament. And, but I think that he kept it simple. But boy, you got to play hard. And I loved playing for him. I thought he was, a great coach. And, a lot of people on the outside, too, they never saw his sense of humor like we did. We saw the sense of humor every day. Now, when he retired and got on the radio and all that, then people start to realize, that guy's kind of fun, actually. Playing for him in practice every day, he was fun to be around.
What did you, in your coaching, what did you carry away? What did you add to your arsenal that you think came from Coach Sanderson?
Probably the two things I mentioned. Trying to keep it simple, which coaches a lot of times we don't. We don't keep it simple. You see something on TV and you're like, we got to get that in. By the end of the year, you got 17,000 plays and all that because you've picked all this stuff up. And Wimp kept it simple, real simple, and he got his team to play really hard. And it was interesting when I started coaching at UCLA, and I coached for Jim Herrick, and Jim's a great, great, great coach. We won a national championship. So two phenomenal coaches, but polar opposites. And the very first week of practice at UCLA, I'm the graduate assistant coach. I'm very young. I'm probably 23 or 4 at the time, 24, maybe 24. And we started on a Monday. We went to Friday. And we got to Friday, and Jim said, Coach Herrick said, all right, guys, well, we'll see you on Monday. I looked around like, wait a minute, what? We're not going to practice Saturday and Sunday? And Jim Herrick looked at me and said, Mark, it's October. He said, I don't want to be, I want to be good in March, not October. And because when I played for Coach Sanderson, a lot of people, I tell this all the time to people, I played even my redshirt year. How about that? But so those 4 years I was in Tuscaloosa, I practiced on Christmas Day every year. I left Mobile at 10 o'clock in the morning on Christmas morning, driving up Highway 43 to get back to Tuscaloosa because he had practice at like 3 o'clock. And so anyway, different, completely different styles and all that, but both very good. But Coach Sanderson he was a stickler to play hard. If you didn't play hard, you weren't going to play. You just weren't going, period. End of story. And so anyway, yeah, he was, I love playing for him.
I think back to what you said about you and J.J. Jackson competing with each other, for a spot or for playing time. And with Wimp looking over your shoulder, I can see that only made both of you better.
It did.
And it's back then when you couldn't transfer with no sit out year, you both got better because of that. And that's really a indication of the effect Wimp Sanderson had on both of y'all. So.
It definitely, it's a great point. And JJ and I talked about this throughout the years, and he could have easily started JJ. You know, JJ was a really good player and a really good shooter, and made the big bank shot against Florida the night he won the championship. But JJ, you know, had played in Montgomery, went out to, I think it was West Texas State, and then transferred back in. But, you know, when I always tell people, when I was coaching, I use the example all the time, you know, competition, it makes you better. It just makes you better. You can never shy away from competition. You should love competition and want competition because just like for me, I knew that JJ was right there. I could feel his breath on my neck. He was right there. And if I didn't practice well or didn't practice hard or I didn't play well in a game, I knew that there was an option. And there was an option of that guy sitting right there. So anyway, competition always brings out the best in us.
Well, as we wrap up part one of this two-part podcast, I want to ask you about a few things I found in the basketball media guides from your Alabama playing days. And you don't know this is coming, so you got to get ready. All right, from the 84-85 media guide, we found out that your cousins are Jim and John Harbaugh. And at the time, Jim was the starting quarterback at Michigan. So tell us about the Harbaugh connection and how y'all are related.
So the connection is that our grandmothers are sisters. So my dad, his mother, and then Jim and John, and they have a sister, Joni, their dad, Jack Harbaugh, they lived across the street from each other growing up in a little town in Ohio called Crestline, Ohio. And so they literally, their houses were right across the street from one another where Jack grew up, and then where my dad and Mike and Johnny Gottfried, they all grew up across the street. And then, you know, when you're little, just a little bitty guy, we'd all get together at summer times and Christmas and all those type things. And you're just cousins. We didn't know if we were first or second or whatever the term was, just running around and playing sports. And so, you know, and matter of fact, Jack Harbaugh, Jim and John's father, and their mother, Jack and Jackie, they were my godparents growing up. And but, you know, I had Jim on my podcast, Jim Harbaugh, and, you know, he brought up this story. We were in the 9th grade, and we'd all gotten together in the summertime and went to the local school gym to play basketball. And I was a pretty good player, and he was more of a football guy, but he was trying his best to prove to me that he was a good basketball player. He was beating me up and elbowing me, and I about swung on him. I about ready to hit him. He tries to say that he got the best of me that day, but I told him, I said, Jim, I ended your basketball career. That's when you went. But, you know, we've all stayed close through the years, and I couldn't be more proud and happy for both of those guys. And, you know, John and what he's done in Baltimore, you know, I'll get a text from them or they'll have a big win and, you know, I'll throw one to them and talk. And so anyway, it's just part of the family growing up.
Yeah. Well, something else we found out about you, seafood gumbo was your most liked dish.
I don't know if it still is, but maybe back then.
Johnny Carson was your favorite comedian.
Now that's right on that one. Jim Farmer and we didn't miss many Johnny Carsons there in the old Bryant Hall at nighttime.
Clint Eastwood was your favorite actor.
Still is. Still to this day. Tough as nails. See, I like them tough.
Yeah.
See, like him. So.
Yeah. Well, he lives up in Carmel Bay, right? Carmel by the sea.
Yep.
San Francisco. Okay.
Yeah, get a little up there.
All right, you're gonna love this one. Your favorite TV show was Gomer Pyle.
Times have changed from that.
How about that?
That's
all
funny.
right. From the 85-86 media guide, you upgraded your favorite TV show to 60 Minutes. So you went from
a little smarter.
Gomer Pyle to 60 Minutes.
Get a little more serious by then, Tommy. See, I was mature.
Yeah, you matured in that 1 year. All right. And then your senior year, your most watched TV show was Late Night with David Letterman.
I switched. I don't know why I switched. I still like
Well, I know Johnny may have retired then.
He might have
'cause
been one.
Jay Leno took over at some point.
Here's a story that a lot of people won't know, but only Jim Farmer and I know. It was actually, we both lied because our favorite show was Days of Our Lives, the old soap opera. We scheduled our classes at Alabama so that we had the 12 to 1 o'clock free so that we could both come back to Days of Our Lives. How about that?
All right. So your hobbies in 86, 87 were photography and going to the beach.
I don't know.
When was the last time you've taken a photo with a real camera?
What I was taking a photo of. That's
Yeah. All right. So here's a good one. Your pet peeve: slow drivers in the passing lane.
Still is.
Yeah.
Still is.
Yeah. I can relate, brother.
37 years later, it still is.
Yeah. Well, Rick, get us out of here for part one.
Mark, I got to tell you, I wish my dad were still alive to have heard the Days of Our Lives answer, to be honest with you, because he was a big fan. He would have even loved you even more. Man, we have loved the opportunity to be able to sit down with you. It's been good to have a laugh. We've learned some stuff. We've gone down memory lane. Let's continue it again. Let's go for round two. We'll come back in a later episode, and then we're going to talk about your coaching career at University of Alabama and beyond.
Thank you very much. Absolutely.
Hey,
All
man,
right.
we like to end our shows the same way every time, and that's we want to give the folks out there a roll tide. So roll tide.
Roll, Tide, roll.
Roll Tide.